In the news tonight, His Majesty attends a grand religious ceremony at the King Abdullah Mosque in Amman to mark the Hijri New Year. Talks continue in Switzerland on convening a peace conference on Syria, and the UN says even if a date could not be announced, the aim is to see that all the parties and groups are ready for a time frame. And the IAEA says it could not assure Iran's nuclear program is entirely peaceful and calls for full and free compliance from North Korea and Syria. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. وكل عام وأنتم بخير. His Majesty the King congratulated Jordanians and the Arab and Muslim world on the Hijri New Year as he attended a grand religious ceremony at the King Abdullah Mosque in Amman to mark the occasion. On this occasion, the king received cables of good wishes from Arab and Islamic leaders who wished him continued good health and well-being and the Jordanian people further progress and prosperity. His Majesty also received similar cables from senior Jordanian civic and military officials who valued his continued efforts in defending the just causes of Arabs and Muslims. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour met a Russian delegation taking part in a meeting of the Jordanian-Russian Joint Governmental Committee led by Agriculture Minister Nikolai Vyderov. Mansour highlighted the topics to be tackled during the meeting, which opened today and covers trade, investment, scientific and cultural bilateral relations. He voiced hopes that the committee would lay the basis for strong commercial ties between the two countries, particularly in the trade of grains. On the Syria crisis, the Prime Minister said Jordan counts on its friendship with Russia and its understanding of how Jordan is being affected by the ongoing civil war and the influx of refugees. He also hailed Russia's sense of moral responsibility towards the Palestinian issue, which makes Moscow a direct partner in the Middle East peace process. The Russian minister voiced his country's interest in a strategic partnership with Jordan, urging the need to set up task forces to promote joint investments and trade exchange. It has been 3 months since the resumption of Palestinian-Israeli negotiations, but so far the talks are going nowhere. Palestinian and Israeli officials made the remarks, painting a grim picture for an upcoming visit by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry to the area. Kerry is due to hold separate meetings tomorrow with the Palestinian President and the Israeli Prime Minister. Few details have emerged from negotiating sessions held at unannounced times and at secret locations, but both sides have been airing their frustration over a lack of progress in the U.S. brokered talks. While the Palestinian president is saying that after all the rounds of negotiations there is nothing on the ground, the Israeli Interior Minister says the Palestinians are not conducting the talks in good faith. In Gaza, the UN said it has halted work on all but one of its 20 building projects as a result of an Israeli ban on importing building materials into the Palestinian enclave. Israel imposed the ban after discovering last month a tunnel which it claimed activists planned to use for attacks inside its territory. The director of Gaza operations for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency UNRWA said this was the 4th week the agency is not allowed to bring in construction material. The only building project still underway is a bridge, and that too was running out of building material. He called for the ban to be lifted, but a spokesman for the Israeli government agency that oversees shipments into Gaza gave no indication when that might happen. Arab League UN Special Envoy Lakhdar Brahimi held a new round of talks in Geneva with representatives of the United States and Russia aimed at discussing key details of a planned Syria peace conference. After their closed-door talks, they were to be joined by officials from the other 3 UN Security Council permanent members, Britain, France and China, as well as Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon and Turkey and the Arab League. A UN source said that even if a conference date could not be announced immediately, the aim is to at least see that all the parties and groups are ready to set a date. Geneva too is meant to build on a June 2012 agreement among world powers in Geneva that called for a transitional authority with full executive powers, but left open whether the Syrian president could play any part. It has been delayed multiple times due to divisions between world powers on several issues, including whether Iran should attend and disagreements among the different factions of the Syrian opposition and the government on the transition of power. In Moscow, meanwhile, the state news agency reported that the United States, the United Nations and Russia will continue to discuss the possibility of Iran's participation. Russia insists that Iran must be invited to any peace talks on Syria after the main Syrian political opposition leader said his coalition would not attend if Tehran took part. Two of Russia's foreign minister's deputies were due to meet U.S. diplomats and Lakhdar Brahimi tonight to discuss efforts to convene the conference.
All those with influence on the situation must certainly be invited to the conference. This includes all Syria's neighbors. This includes pretty much all countries of the Arab Gulf. This includes not only Arab countries but also Iran. This includes UN Security Council permanent members.
On the ground in Syria, a mortar shell slammed into a building in Damascus that houses the Vatican's embassy. An official at the embassy said the mortar has damaged part of the roof and left broken glass inside the building. The embassy is located in the wealthy Maliki area of the Syrian capital, where there are several other diplomatic corps as well as the residences of government and security officials. It was not clear if the embassy was deliberately targeted in the mortar attack. The Vatican embassy, still operating in Damascus, has been hit 8 to 10 times by mortars since July.
This morning there was an accident for the Apostolic Nunciature in Damascus, but there were material damages and not damage for the people, for the persons. It is due also to the time of this accident, because it was early in the morning. If it would be later on, it would be much more dangerous. And in this sense, we can say, God, thank to God that this was without damage for the persons.
And as the fighting continues elsewhere in the country, this report shows the dramatic situation in Aleppo, where homes have become the front line.
Rebel fighters entered the remains of a house in Aleppo's old city. What was once a home is now a front line. Last week, government forces recaptured a key town southeast of Aleppo. It was another setback for rebels. It prompted the resignation of a local rebel leader from the Western-backed Supreme Military Council. In a resignation video, he blamed rifts among rebels for losing the town, bitterly congratulating the opposition in exile for your, quote, hotels and political posts. The fog of war is consuming much of the country. The video, which cannot be independently verified by Reuters, appears to show a wounded government soldier coming under fire, crossing a street. Two more follow. One appears to fall after being shot. Footage from suburban Damascus shows the scramble in the aftermath of an attack on debris-lined streets. In recent months, the government has launched an offensive to win back rebel-held suburbs of the capital city. Rebel strength has been eroding on the battlefield, with President Bashar al-Assad's forces making slow but gradual gains as they consolidate control near Damascus. The war in Syria has killed more than 100,000 people and caused millions to flee their homes.
Meanwhile, Syria's deputy foreign minister says the country's chemical weapons stockpiles will be disposed outside the borders under the watch of the Organization for the Proliferation of Chemical Weapons, OPCW, and the United Nations. In an interview with China's CCTV, Faisal Miqdad denied any relation between the neutralization of the country's chemical weapons and Bashar Assad's possible resignation. He also made clear Syria's stand on weapons of mass destruction, saying Damascus has always called for the disarmament of the Middle East and expressed confidence in achieving a win-win cooperation with the OPCW to neutralize the country's chemical weapons within a planned time frame.
We are happy. We did our best. We fully cooperated. What we want to do in the future is to emphasize on the transfer of these materials into a place outside Syria. A delegation from the Syrian government will be leaving Damascus shortly to discuss with the OPCW all these arrangements. Yes, I am happy, and our cooperation with the OPCW has been exemplary, and if it depends on Syria, we shall go on time and as being demanded by the Convention.
And another day of violence in Iraq. 9 people were wounded when 4 bombs exploded in the northern Iraqi city of Kirkuk. One of the blasts ripped through a car park near a busy pedestrian crossing in the heart of the town. Another bomb demolished 2 houses belonging to members of the security forces in the south of the city. The blast caused the homes to cave in, the roofs to crumble, and wounded 3 residents. The International Atomic Energy Agency said it could not assure that Iran's nuclear program is entirely peaceful and called for full and free compliance from North Korea and Syria. Speaking to the General Assembly at the United Nations headquarters in New York, IAEA Director General Yukiya Amano said the agency needs more information about Iran's nuclear program. He also called for full cooperation from the government of Syria.
The agency continues to verify the non-diversion of nuclear material declared by Iran under its safeguard agreement. However, we are unable to provide credible assurance about the absence of undeclared nuclear material and activities. The agency, therefore, cannot conclude that all nuclear material in Iran is in peaceful activities. In the case of Syria, you will recall that in May 2011, I reported that it was very likely that a building destroyed at the Dayal site was a nuclear reactor, which should have been declared to the agency. The agency has not received any new information that would affect that assessment. I again urge Syria to cooperate fully with the agency in connection with unresolved issues related to the Dayal site and other locations.
Earlier, Iran announced Amano is considering an invitation to visit Tehran for scheduled talks. If confirmed, his visit would be a possible sign of progress in the long-stalled investigation into Iran's suspected nuclear arms research. In Brussels, EU and Turkish negotiators spoke optimistically about a new momentum in Turkey's long-stalled membership drive as the first talks in more than 3 years opened. The launch of the talks on regional policy was delayed from June, after Germany and several EU governments blocked them in protest at Turkey's crackdown on anti-government protests. Turkey has provisionally closed just 1 of 35 chapters it must negotiate with the EU to bring its laws into lines with the bloc's standards. It has now opened 13 other chapters. Turkey's chief EU negotiator said the new round of talks after the long gap carried symbolic importance.
This is really a turning point in Turkish-EU relations. We're opening a chapter after a gap of 40 months of waiting. 3.5 years. It's symbolically very important.
The developments in Turkey over the past year underline the importance of continuing European Union engagement and of the European Union remaining the benchmark for reform in Turkey. We need more engagement, not less.
Still in Belgium, a Belgian book association broke the world record with the longest book domino chain, composed of almost 5,000 books. The record-breaking event was designed to celebrate books and promote reading. The thousands of books smoothly tumbled along the 614 meters long path in only 6 minutes. As they fell, they spelled the Dutch words for book, fair, and read. It took 40 volunteers 2 hours to set up the lines of books. And over to the world of style. On the last day of the Digital Fashion Week, Scottish designer Holly Fulton displayed her spring-summer collection in Singapore, her first in Southeast Asia. The collection, inspired from the 1970s, included bright printed dresses and skirts in shades of tangerine, watermelon, and pale blue. After the fashion industry has gone digital, online viewers worldwide are able to watch the shows live and make instant purchases off the runway. We begin with tennis and the ATP World Finals in London. Rafael Nadal started the ATP World Tour Finals with a crushing 2-set victory over compatriot David Ferrer. The 1 hour and 14 minutes match ended with the world number 1 winning 6-3, 6-2. He now joins Stanislas Wawrinka at the top of Group A, ahead of Ferrer and Thomas Berdych. And Argentina's Juan Martín del Porto beat Richard Gasquet in the first of their ATP World Finals. Although the Frenchman took the first set, Del Porto gradually found his range and the match swung his way. Del Porto, seeded fourth and in front of a crowd of around 17,000, won 6-7, 6-3, 7-5 to take an early lead in Group B. World number 1 golfer Tiger Woods teed off from the Bosphorus Bridge to publicize his involvement in the Turkish Open golf tournament. The Turkish Open runs from November 7th till the 10th. Traffic on one side of the bridge was stopped for an hour, while Woods hit 10 golf balls towards the European end of the bridge. In the past, Venus Williams has played tennis on the bridge, and Formula One driver David Coulthard drove a car across the bridge, which spans the continents of Asia and Europe. And finally, a quick look at the weather. Chilly tonight across the highlands and relatively cold in the eastern plains with easterly light to moderate winds. A slight rise in temperature is in the forecast tomorrow with pleasant weather across the hilly areas and warm south. Winds will be southerly moderate, changing at times. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect relatively hot conditions with northerly brisk winds and calm seas. Here now is a look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, here's a reminder of the day's top stories. His Majesty attends a grand religious ceremony at the King Abdullah Mosque in Amman to mark the Hijri New Year. Talks continue in Switzerland on convening a peace conference on Syria, and the UN says even if a date could not be announced, the aim is to see that all parties and groups are ready for a time frame. And the IAEA says it could not assure if Iran's nuclear program is entirely peaceful and calls for full and free compliance from North Korea and Syria. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Alia Tuqan. Thank you for joining us and have a good night.